Good afternoon, everyone. I've been asked to fill in as the moderator, and I'm happy to be back and speak, and I hope today has been going wonderful. I have the great honor and pleasure to introduce our next speaker, our keynote speaker for today. And I only met Dr. Kokkinos yesterday or the day before. But I'd heard of his work for many, many years. Very famous person, doing very important work that's known throughout the United States and throughout the world. So I think we're very, very honored and very lucky to have our next speaker here today. And so as a quick introduction, Dr. Kokkinos works both at the VA hospital in Washington, D.C. The VA hospital system is the U.S. health system for veterans that have served in the military. Huge health system doing research. He's also a professor in the Department of Kinesiology in Rutgers University in New Jersey. Dr. Kokkinos, his research emphasizes cardiorespiratory fitness, human health, and disease conditions. So I'm going to end the introduction there and turn it over to him because you're here to listen to him speak and not me. And so with no further ado, it's to you, sir.
Professor, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Καλημέρα σας. Είναι με μεγάλη μου χαρά που είμαι εδώ, στην Αθήνα, μια πόλη αθάνατη, εδώ που οι πρόγονοί μας κάνανε συμπόσια και σφυριλατήσανε τα θεμέλια της κοινωνίας των δυτικών χωρών και τα θεμέλια της ανθρωπότητας. Είμαι πολύ συγκινημένος. That in this tradition, και τώρα επειδή είναι συγκινημένος, τα ξέχασα και τα ελληνικά. In this tradition, we follow. And we are gathered here for 2 days to talk about our issues. And how do we do that? How do we get here? It's because I'm finding out the hard work that a few of you did. Professor Filippo and his group, to make it possible for us to enjoy Greece, to make it possible for me to be here with you. And there's no great honor for me. It's just absolutely, it's a great honor. Thank you. And so I am going to introduce the topic is exercise medicine. And this topic, this title, has a doubt embedded into it. I'm not here to convince you that exercise is not medicine, because that would be foolish. You already know exercise is medicine. Now, but what am I here for? What am I going to talk? Well, let me tell you this. Someone, somewhere, and I know who they were, and I'm not going to name names, but they got together and said, wait a minute. It wasn't yesterday, it wasn't 10 years ago, it was many years ago. That exercise seems to be so important for human health. It plays such an important role that one day it will become medicine. And so the title, after many years, that's the title, Exercise is Medicine. But they had to sit down and look at the literature. They didn't just say, okay, well, let's go ahead and mention exercise is medicine. No. They looked at the literature. And the literature led them to that decision. And so today I'm going to ask all of you to be in their position. Let's pretend that we do not know that exercise is medicine. And as scientists, what we want to do, we want to examine the literature. We want to scientifically scrutinize the literature. And let's see what we have to do. Let's say that your duty, your job, was to scrutinize all the literature and come up with a conclusion that exercise is either medicine or it's not. And so let's go together. And I will present data, and I will make my comments, and you go ahead and see what you think. So for exercise as medicine, we have to start with a very basic premise. For exercise to be medicine, it has to meet certain criteria. It must. It cannot otherwise be medicine. What are the criteria? It has to be efficacious. It has to do what we think it does. If it doesn't, we have to have data to support that exercise. Yes, it does do so. What else does it have to do? Well, it has to be safe. You cannot have something as medication. You cannot have something that kills 25% of the people, but it's beneficial to 75% of them. Well, it's not good. That's not good enough. And finally, it has to be applicable. It has to be sustained. Now, I would say exercise is good, okay, but only 10% of the people, again, can do it. And I'll have more to say about this. But all these basic criteria have to be met. And so what is exercise efficacious? Does exercise do what we think it does? Well, since 1953, that was the first study by Morris, who observed that, physically active individuals had half of the mortality rates or half of the disease incidence than the physically inactive. We now have thousands and thousands and thousands of years of follow-up, hundreds of studies, maybe thousands by now. And we see something very, very important. We see a consistent association between exercise, between fitness, and mortality rate or disease incidence. And the association is inverse. The higher your fitness level, the lower the mortality rate, or the, let's call them not just mortality rates, but health outcomes. The association, the rates are approximately anywhere from 20% to 70% lower. And that depends, why is it 20 to 70%? Well, it depends on the population, how the data were stratified and all that. But there's a consistent and strong association. However, we have a problem. Epidemiologic designs do not demonstrate cause and effect. It's by design we cannot claim that. It reminds me of I was in a conference just like today, but not as good. And I presented my data, and this cardiologist comes up, kind of boisterous attitude, and he says to me, basically, that I overstated, that I have overdone it. How can you claim all this? Because epidemiology, and he says very proudly, there's no cause and effect. My answer to that was to him, I said, well, thank you for pointing out, but I would like to just point out as well that I never said there was a cause and effect. I always said an association. So one, you cannot accuse me of that. And two, you are correct, there is a cause and effect. However, we cannot, and it would be foolish for me to say there is a cause and effect. However, I said it would be just as foolish for all of us to ignore evidence just because, to dismiss evidence just because they come from epidemiologic studies. That would be foolish as well. After all, The Framingham study is an epidemiologic design study. So are we supposed to, and Framingham study set the basis for medicine. Are we supposed to ignore that? And I even went out and said, well, do you tell your patients not to smoke? He said, sure. I said, well, can you show me a randomized controlled trial? He sat down real quickly. Okay. However, we cannot dismiss the probability that cardiorespiratory fitness and health outcomes may be explained by other factors. We cannot dismiss that. We have to be vigilant. If we are going to say something that will affect thousands, if not millions of people, we better be correct. So let's see what are some of the problems. And I mean, as scientists, the randomized controlled trials, yes, they are better than epidemiologic designs, but they're not perfect. We have to do the study correctly, and we have lots of examples that randomized controlled trials really gave us erroneous results. So let's not fool ourselves, oh, it's a randomized controlled trial. But guess what? You screwed up in this, and now the results are terrible. Okay, so we as scientists, we come up with ways. If in order to find the truth, if it's not staring at us, studies like if you jump out of the 10th floor, you're likely not going to survive. We don't have to do a randomized control trial. Or we don't have to do epidemiologic design. The truth is right there. But for studies like this, we have to come up with ways as scientists to uncover the truth. So we have this criteria that we use as epidemiologists. This criteria strengthen. If we meet those criteria, the link between exercise and health outcomes is strengthened. So what are these criteria? I'll go over a couple of them, 5 of them, I believe. And some of them, there are 10 actually, sometimes 12, there are revisions of that, but I'll go over 5 of them, and also there are criteria that apply only to exercise, and we'll talk about this. So the first criteria is there has to be an association, and the association has to be strong. You can't say it's 10% reduction. It's not strong. The second criteria has to be consistent. The association has to be consistent. You cannot say, well, I found this in this population, but this population shows me exactly the opposite. It's either yes or no. It cannot be. If there are differences, then why are there differences? If Greeks show changes and the Italians do not, there has to be a reason for that. Okay. So it has to be, we have to have a consistent association. The other one has to be a dose response. If I give you a little bit, I see a little bit of change. If I give you more, I see more. And why is it a dose response? Because all biological systems work on that. There's a threshold, and then the change occurs. The more you give, the better, and then there's a plateau. If you see that S-shaped curve, wow, there's a mechanism there. At least it suggests there's a mechanism. We have to take care of reverse causality, and I'll take some time to explain that. What is reverse causality? When an exposure must precede the outcome. And I'll talk more about this. And you also have to have reversibility. If you remove the exposure, what happens? Or if you change the exposure, what happens? If you are exposing your skin to the sun and you get burned, what if you remove, not this time, not the sun, but your skin from the sun, then does this change? And we have to have that. And it's tricky, how do we do that in epidemiology? Let's then go ahead and examine those 5 at least criteria that we have to meet, and let's see how exercise or physical activity meets or does not meet those criteria. So since that study again, 1953, 70 years ago, 71 now, we have so many so much information and evidence from everywhere that we do see approximately 50%, as Morris did, 50% reduction in health outcomes, improvement, 50% reduction in mortality, 50% reduction in disease, and all that. That was back in 1953. I can go on and tell you that Morris was influenced by Hippocrates, but that's going to take another day. And so then 30 years later, approximately 30 years later, we see the very similar results presented by this study, the Puffenberger, famous Puffenberger, the Harvard alumni study, which shows exactly the same thing. And then approximately the same time, we have the Blair study, which shows exactly the same. We see the same trend, the same relationship. Now, again, between 1953 and 1980s and 90s, there are many studies. I'm just presenting the very key studies, the landmark studies that changed the paradigm. Now, all the studies definitely strongly suggest that there's something with exercise here. There are two, England, Boston, Dallas, Texas. There are three totally different populations, yet we have the same results. Any idiot will think, well, this is great. I mean, we cannot have the same results. We have, you cannot avoid the fact that there's something going on here. We have something. We're hitting gold here. Now, but what is this? What are those studies? Why do they differ? Why do we have to do from here and there and there? Well, let's talk a little bit about it. All studies have problems. All studies have weakness. In fact, when you write a paper, as you very well know, you say strengths and weakness of the study. What are the weaknesses of the study? Well, Morris's study, Morris's study, he asked questions. What kind of work do you do? He did not know what you do after work. Plus, he compared bus drivers who were older than the bus conductors. The bus conductors were younger, slimmer, and on and on. The bus drivers, or the other one, the carriers, the mail carriers, the tachydromi, they were younger, they were walking, or the desk clerks, they were older. They got their position, they were sitting on that. So obviously the question is, well, listen, you did not, a 70-year-old would die before a 20-year-old. So what's going on here? So he was criticized by that, but Morris could not adjust for that. There were no statistical procedures at that time that he could adjust for, he could use to adjust for this. He tried to kind of stratify the data based on age and all that, but he still was not able to adjust. Now, what about the Harvard here? Okay, the Harvard study. The Harvard study, Puffenberger adjusted for this because by that time we have Cox regression analysis that we could adjust for it. It was introduced in 1973, Cox regression. We could adjust for this, however, and then, of course, Blair could adjust for it. Now, what's the difference between Blair's study and those two studies? Well, Blair is objectively measured fitness. Blair used the treadmill. Puffenberger used questionnaires. But still, we still see the same results. However, what's the problem with those two? Well, to go to Harvard in the 50s, you were not poor. You had money. Okay, maybe not so much brains, but certainly money. To go to this club it was the Cooper Clinic, I visited that club in the 80s, and it was a beautiful place. The tuition there was, I think, about $16,000 a year, okay? I was making $19,000 a year. They would not let me in. Okay, so my point is, these two studies, although good, they are looking at rich people. Well, rich people have different lifestyles. So, do these studies apply to average, everyday people? So these are the weakness of these studies, okay? I'm making that point because we're going to go on a little bit later, more modern times. Having that in mind, do these results apply to other people? And sure enough, they do. These studies are more modern, of course, in 2018, and we see exactly the same association. And also, these studies examine women. Blair had only 3,200 women. This study had approximately 50,000 women, I think, or more. Now, what do we see here that is, we really did not notice it until later, but what do we see here? It appears that women do better than men with probably in the same fitness category. This went unnoticed for years, even by me. Not that I'm the genius, but I did not notice it until this study that came out a few days ago. In fact, I had to revise my talk because of this study, because I thought it was important. Not revised, but I changed, of course, and I sent it, and I asked the people to upgrade it. And why is this? Because we do see that women may be doing a little better than men. There's a whole lot of, again, we can give a talk. I'm not going to go into it, but we can give a talk why women do better than men. And there are reasons for that, but if you have an interest, then we can talk afterwards. Just keep in mind that women are always better than men anyway, so it's what my wife tells me. So, and this is my study, and in fact, we do see the same things. In fact, now we see that at equal meds, at similar meds, we see that women may be doing a little better, and something to examine in the future. So, again, remember what I said, socioeconomic reasons. It could be that, like I said, they have better food, they have more money, their health, they have a better health care system, especially in the United States, because we don't have even a country like Greece, that Europe, that has the health care system. Money talks, and they can get private care if you have money. So it could be that we cannot dismiss the fact that because you are better off, you could pay for better health care and so forth. Or you don't need McDonald's or Chick-fil-A, whatever, but you eat lobsters or whatever. Okay, so we need to take care, to pay attention to this. And also, there are comorbidities. The early studies did not adjust well for comorbidities. Okay, so we're going to go into it a little bit. Now, the issue with socioeconomic issue was resolved by this study. This study was 130,000 people, 17 high-income individuals, middle income, and low income, and there was no difference. All of them, as you see here, the association, the relationship is the same. So socioeconomic, in fact, I wrote the editorial in this study, and it was basically that was what I came up with. I said, there's no difference, period. It doesn't matter who you are socioeconomically. Exercise is blind to that. Now, this particular study, though, again, it's a questionnaire study. Questionnaires, although good, I forget what I did yesterday. You think when someone asks me, how much do you exercise? I know. Plus, we exaggerate exercise, we estimate our food intake and all that. Okay, it's human. So the question, there is also a little bit of bias there. So here comes the Veterans Affairs study, exercise testing and health outcome study. I struggled a lot to come with a word, Greek word, ethos. And actually, I did not struggle a lot. It came up very nicely. Okay, and in this study, what we have is it's the largest cohort in the world, 750,302 people. Followed over many years, men, women, objectively assessed exercise capacity by a treadmill, multiple assessments, racial diversity. We have 25% of African Americans or blacks, Hispanics, Native Americans, and all that. And all socioeconomic strata, and also the most important thing is similar health care regardless of who you are, because the VA hospital provides health care, similar health care to everyone. In addition, we have electronic records that most systems do not have. We are the first ones to have electronic records. What do we find? We find that if you are least fit, you are in trouble. Your risk is 4 times higher than any other comorbidity. Look at the comorbidity that comes next to it. It's chronic kidney disease. 49% higher, 4 times higher if you are not fit. Okay? Now, if you go to a physician, obviously he or she will treat all this disease, but ignore your fitness. Yet that carries at least 2.5 to 3 times higher risk than kidney disease. Think about that. Now, what about racial differences? Are we all the same? Yes, we are. Look at this. No matter whether you're white, African American, Hispanic, Native American, what we see is the very same trend, which goes back to what did I say? It goes back to replication and consistency. That relationship is very consistent. It doesn't matter who you are. Your skin color, your eye color, your hair color does not matter. What about age? The problem with the old studies, we did not have anyone over the age of 75, maybe very few. Here we have ages all the way from 30 to 95 years of age. What do we see? In fact, the 80-year-olds, we have the biggest cohort of almost 27,000. And what do we see? They're all the same. The trend is the same. Not only that, but we see something very interesting and very expected, that younger people need more exercise to reach approximately 50%, approximately I said, 50% reduction in mortality. And approximately the next group, approximately 1 met lower. So the threshold is about 10 mets, 11 here, 10 here, those two, 10 here, 9 here, and here, and 7 if you are older and you could do 7 mets on the treadmill, your mortality rate is 50% lower. What about dose response? We talked about this. Is there a dose response? Here is the same data. This clearly shows a dose-response association. Okay? The more fit you are, the lower your risk. And here is another study which we determined what is the threshold. See the threshold here? And those on the left, you see an increased risk. Those on the right, you see a decreased risk. And we determined the thresholds for this phenomenon. Now, why am I emphasizing this? Remember the S-shaped curve? There's a threshold. And if we have a threshold, there's a mechanism. Reverse causality. That's a very important topic, very important issue. What is the reverse causality? When the exposure, well, in reverse causality, remember, if you do not have reverse causality, the exposure must precede the outcome. In exercise, the outcome is mortality or disease. You cannot have disease coming before fitness. How does this happen? Well, here is what we expect. We are saying, or here is what we're saying. We're saying that low cardiorespiratory fitness leads to higher disease or death. What if that's not the case? What if the low fit individuals have undiagnosed disease? People who don't feel well, but they don't clinically, they don't go to the doctors or whatever, they're not likely to go exercise. They don't feel well. That's just natural. So if the undiagnosed disease, if those people with low fitness actually had the disease, and then we say, well, they died. Well, of course they died. They died from disease, not because they were not unfit. So we have to be very careful with that. And how do we do to deal with that? Here is the curve that we see, the mortality curve for the entire cohort. We dealt with that. And if this were reverse causality, if these people were dying because they were sick prior, and in other words, sickness was the cause of low fitness and not the other way around. So then we should see this association. All this fit, low fit, any type of fitness, any of these categories, the mortality will be similar. That's the assumption, and that's a very rational assumption. Now, we do see this, so this must be explained by something. If it isn't fitness, it has to be something else that is explained. And we now begin to see, what if we assume if those people were sick prior to the test and the sickness was the reason for them not be fit, then they will die within a couple of years. So what do? We exclude those people. If you died within 2 years, we exclude you from the analysis. And we run the model again. What do we see? Really, basically the same. It's not going to be exactly the same. If it's exactly the same, you're in trouble. Something's going on. It's wrong. So it's not going to be the same, but the trend will be the same. So we see the same trend. What if we exclude some more people? Those who were on beta blockers, those who did not achieve all the way to their maximum, those who had some issues, we exclude them. What happens? Nothing happens. That's the green line. Same thing is happening. What if we exclude those who were cachectic? They had very low BMI, so we think maybe they were sick to begin with. That's why they were low. We know that low BMI is associated with higher mortality. So we excluded those as well. What happens? Nothing happens to the model. Nothing happens to our association. What if we exclude all of them? Those who meet all the criteria, we exclude them all. Nothing happens. So it cannot be. So this difference cannot explain by any of these. It can only be explained by fitness. Okay, this is mortality. What about disease? Heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. We heard a lot about this in the last day or so. Again, we assume that if the fitness status had nothing to do with heart failure, having heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, then the risk would be like this. The line would be like this. What do we get? Well, we get exactly the same. And this is all, the green is all. We took out all those who developed heart failure in 3 years. That's the bluish, whatever, the line. Then we took out all those who went even further. If you developed heart failure, within 5 years, we'll take you out. Because we thought maybe you had signs of heart failure, no one noticed it. All the way to 5 years, nothing happens. And then we did something else. Because of the numbers, remember, we have 624,000 people. Because of the numbers, we had the luxury to do that. And so what we did another step is this is competing risk. If you die before you develop heart failure, you cannot develop heart failure. And so we took out those who died. Let's say that you died because you were sick. That's why we see that you didn't have heart failure. So when we took those out and we ran the model, again, very similar results. So you cannot, although we went through the extra step, we cannot explain this other than fitness. The only thing that can explain this difference is fitness. What about reversibility? That's a little tricky, and the reason this was not done because of the numbers, again. But we do have the numbers, so we did exactly that. What's the reversibility in exercise? How do you reverse exercise? Well, if you have multiple tests, you take the first test and the last test, and you say, okay, who changed between that? Who stayed the same? Who went up? Who went down in their fitness? And that's how you do it. So here is, if we look at the study, the entire group, we see exactly the same principle, the same trend. The higher the fitness, by the way, we all recognize what those graphs do. In epidemiology, 1 is the base, anything below 1 is positive, anything above 1 is negative. In other words, the risk increases if your value is 1.5, 1.6 and all that, and the risk is lower if your value is 0.5. It's 1 minus that value, 1 minus. Okay, so here you see, as you increase fitness, you are cutting the risk by anywhere from 32 to 50+% lower, okay? This is for people with cardiovascular disease to the left and no cardiovascular disease. And the trend is very, very similar, okay? Now, here is what happens when we take the unfit people, unfit who stayed unfit, and the fit who stayed fit. Look at the difference between the two. But what is interesting, unfit people who became fit, now their risk has decreased. Again, here is 1. Okay, this is how we see it. This is what happens. So unfit people who became fit, their survival rate increased. Fit people who became unfit, their survival rate decreased. Do you see it? Now, what if we take in every quartile, the lowest quartile, those are in the 25th percentile, all the way to the highest. What happens to these people? The first quartile, you see exactly the same thing. Here, as you increase your fitness by 1 to 2 mets on the second test, on the final test, from 1 to 2 mets, you see mortality decreasing. And as you decrease fitness from 1 to 2 or 2+ mets, your mortality rate increases. So we're manipulating now. We see now what happens when you change fitness. And that trend continues for every quartile, for the low fit, the very low fit, the next to it, and so forth and so on. Okay? Changes in fitness, cardiorespiratory fitness, reflect inverse and proportional changes in risk. The more you change the cardiorespiratory fitness, the more you change the risk. 2 meds of change have a higher risk or a higher benefit than 1 med of change. Here are the people with cardiovascular disease, because we need to see if those who are diseased, do they have the same benefits? And we see here exactly the same thing. People with cardiovascular disease, the same trends. However, note that the risk in fit and high fit people, these 2 groups, you have to decrease by 2 meds or more to make a change, to make a difference. So there is some protection there. When you're fit and you lose a little bit of fitness, there's some protection there that continues on. But once you go beyond, when you go more than 2 meds, then your risk increases. Okay? And that's interesting that, because it shows that fitness is not ephemeral. It's not 6 months or so. It kind of lasts longer. The benefits last longer. And that was a lingering problem, even back with or lingering issue, even back with the Puffenberger study, because, he mentioned something then that people who were fit lived 2 years longer. And here are the people with no cardiovascular disease. And we see the same trend. And again, what happens, the high fit individuals, as you can see, they do not have an increased risk. You see those? The high fit individuals, even when they lose 2 meds or more, they don't really meet that. The risk goes a little bit higher, but it's statistically not significant. Now, what does this mean? Again, it means the same thing, but it kind of fits. Cardiovascular disease people are not as protected because of the disease. No cardiovascular disease people, they have a little more protection. So it kind of fits. Okay, that's great, but could it be genetics? We know the genes determine anywhere from the color of our eyes to disease to longevity. Could it be genetics? Okay, let's examine this. What determines fitness? Fitness is determined by genetics. Maybe some studies show up to 40%, maybe even 50%. I'm not sure if it's 50%, but certainly genetics play a role. And proper exercise. So fitness is determined by 2 factors, by your parents and your exercise habits. Well, however, decline in fitness is definitely determined not by genetics. It's determined by aging, disease, and sedentary behavior. However, we adjusted for age in all this. The statistics are very powerful. They adjust for everything, for age and all that. And we also adjusted for comorbidity. So what's happening there? Well, it is plausible that inherently determined structural and functional characteristics that favor high cardiorespiratory fitness also render the individual more resilient to disease. In other words, the athletes have bigger heart, bigger arteries, and all that, and that's what's happening. A 50% plaque in a sedentary individual with a coronary artery of let's say 1 centimeter, versus a 50%, the same percentage in a coronary artery, not 50%, but the same amount of blockage, and a coronary artery of 2 centimeters, it's only 25% now. So could it be that because the athletes are structured the same, somehow are protected? Could be. However, if that was true, then changes in cardiorespiratory fitness should not explain changes. It would not likely coincide with changes in mortality. Because if you change and then you change the fitness status and you change the outcome, then it cannot be genetics. And so this makes a strong argument that it's exercise, it's fitness. Okay? Now we talked about, I'm going to jump up a little bit. Now, how do we do this time? A few more minutes. Medication. Medication is a very interesting interaction between medication and fitness. And here is a very landmark study, medication, placebo, metformin, and all that. And what do we see? 58% lower incidence of diabetes, I meant to say, versus 31%. 31 to 58, 59, almost double. Okay? So I said that the studies were mostly epidemiologic, but not all of them. Okay? So we're going to go some of the studies. And here's another, it is a meta-analysis. And we looked at the studies that looked at fitness and studies that looked at medication. Here's what's happening. Let's assume that fitness studies, they showed 45% reduction. No, it's not. It's 45, yeah. Percent reduction, and medication about approximately 30% reduction. Let's call it even. Let's say that both of them do the same. Well, here's what happens when you follow up years later. What do we have here? Anywhere from 5 to 9 years, we still have a protection of approximately 28%. A few weeks later, we have no protection from medication. So you tell me which one you'd like to take, a medication or exercise. All right, so now here's an interesting, we have the Look Ahead study, which was a study, this was on, the previous study was on pre-diabetics going to diabetes. The Look Ahead study, they looked at the diabetics if they do well. And the data here was disappointing because the conclusion was that we did not meet statistical significance. And basically what they said is that if you're diabetic and you exercise, you're not gonna make it. You're not gonna make any difference. However, we have some very serious problems in these studies. The Look Ahead study, which promised to be basically the best study that will resolve this issue, did not resolve the issue did not give us results because, number one, they had very low mortality rate. And what people do not know about the Look Ahead study, it's a nutrition study, not exercise study. Exercise kind of added onto it, and let me show you what happens here. In the other studies, we see like 30 to 50% mortality or events, whereas we only see 6 to 7% events. If you have low events, you really cannot meet statistical power. And that's why this study we had a problem with the study. Here's an interesting study that I thought they missed the boat. They really messed it up. Here is a study where they looked at A1C, and if the A1C increased, up to a certain level, they increased the medication, and if A1C decreased, they decreased medication. Okay, now if you look at this study, tell me which group would you like to be? It's obvious that I would like to be in this group and not this group. They increased medication, they decreased medication. How much do they decrease medication? Look at this. The medications in a lifestyle group were decreased by 73%. The standard and the standard group, they increased medication by 41%. You can see it here. And some of them, obviously, they were exercising, taking care of themselves, they decreased. Now, the study, they looked at this group. At the end of the study, they looked at this, and they found no differences. However, if you look if you look at the entire, if you average these values, you get a 4.7% reduction here and 1.19% reduction here. Yet the conclusion is totally wrong. For adults with diabetes, lifestyle intervention compared to standard therapy resulted in a change in glycemic control that did not reach the criteria for equivalence, but was in the direction consistent with benefits. I can tell you there was a big uproar in the United States when this study came out. The media took it and said exercise doesn't work. Basically, that's what they said. Exercise doesn't work. And it's because of that wording. What do you mean exercise doesn't work? How can it work? You keep reducing medication and we still have lower glycemic A1C. How is it? It's not the exercise that did not meet the criteria. It's the medication that did not meet the criteria of exercise. And they got it all wrong. And again, we missed the boat. And this is, again, with the heart failure action study. And it's interesting that we also, this study was mentioned the other day, and we also missed the boat here because we had very sick people. And what happened with this study is that if you please take a look at this. Here we see that in this study, fitness increases, and after a year it drops. Look at all the parameters that they changed. It's the mirror image of the fitness. Here's the fitness. Here's everything. Everything went the right direction up to a year, and then they began to deteriorate. Because after the year they lost fitness. How do you expect exercise to work if you're not doing exercise? Okay, that's why. I'm going to rush a little bit. Now, when they looked at the people that completed exercise, we got exactly the opposite results, 20 to 30%. Approximately 30% reduction in mortality in those who exercise. By the way, I was very intimately involved with this because I was one of the PIs. We had 86 people in the study. And when we looked at those who exercised, at least met the criteria, we had 20 to 30% reduction. Here's another interesting study when it comes to statins and diabetes. This study looks at the statins. And we know that statins increases the risk of becoming diabetic. I don't know if you are familiar with that, but there's now very strong evidence that when you take statins, your risk of becoming diabetic increases approximately 25, 30%. It all depends on what you see. And in fact, this is what they did, they looked at diabetics on statins and they said, well, look, the progression, if you're diabetic, you progress to insulin, taking insulin to control your diabetes, and the people who were taking statins, their risk of going to take insulin was 37% higher. Well, when I looked at the study, I said, well, they didn't do the exercise. They did not look at exercise. So we looked at a study, 178,000, almost 179,000. They only had about half of that. And we looked at what is the impact of fitness? So we found again that the rate of progression to insulin was 21% higher in those taking statins. So very consistent. However, they did not, by the way, this study did not adjust for anything. Remember, odds ratio. Odds ratio is not as powerful as hazard ratio. So we adjusted for everything. We found 21% higher risk. However, look what is happening. The study did not look at BMI and did not look at fitness. What happens? As the BMI increases, so does the risk of having advancing to insulin therapy. And exactly the opposite with exercise. If you're fit, you are not likely to advance to fitness. I'll give you the chance to go ahead and take that picture. All right, so that's interesting, right? Now, what about there's an interaction now. We found an interaction between all this. So we looked at BMI. Within BMI, if you are at any BMI status, what happens if you are on statins versus no statins? So as you can see, in every BMI category, if you're on statins, your risk increases. 1.23, 23% here, 40% here, 59% here, and 90% here, higher risk. So if you're obese and you're on statins, you are having approximately twice the risk of taking insulin or advancing to insulin. What happens with fitness? Fitness is exactly the opposite. Here is what happens. At the very least fit, and the next to it, let's talk about the very least fit. If you are not fit, your risk is 43% higher. If you just a little bit fit, only 9% higher. And then these guys do not have the risk, and these guys have low risk. So fitness takes over right after least fit, a little bit of help, and then more so as you become fitter. So people on statins here are better off than these people no statins. And I think that's very powerful. That's a very powerful message. Now, what about we did this study back some years ago. We looked at statins and what happens to mortality. And if you are on statins, statins are important. I'm not saying don't take statins. I'm just saying take statins, but also exercise. That's what I'm saying. Here is, if you're on statins, your risk in this study is 35% lower versus people non statins. However, if you are exercising and no statins, look at this. It's a dose response. Lower, lower, and lower. This staircase phenomenon. And here is the entire group. And here is those taking statins, and here are those taking no statins. However, you see that if you're taking statins and you're fit, it appears that you're doing better. So the combination of the two looks like it's better, and it is. Look at the people, the low fit individuals, very low fit. If you're not on statins, you'll have 35% increase in mortality. Next group, that 35% is gone. And then the next group, you have 81% just concentrate not on the green bars. The green bars are statins, those whitish bars. Then you have no risk. And if you are fit and statins, you're doing much better. So the combination, so the side effects of the medication are obliterated by fitness. Attenuated may be the word. And see, these guys, these people are better off than this individual. So there have been many reports, couple of reports, especially one of our own, Ioannidis is a physician and epidemiologist, and Nasi was his student. And anyways, we have two reports by them that say the exercise is just as effective as medication. I'd like to point to this study. 26 different diseases are being affected by exercise. Exercise has an impact, a favorable impact on 26 different diseases. And can anyone name a medication that has a favorable effect on all these systems? None. By the way, no side effects. Let's not forget that, no side effects. Any medication that you take has side effects. Okay, is exercise safe? Remember we talked about safety? I'm sorry I'm keeping you too long, but I just keep going until someone tells me, okay. The president says that's okay, so I'm going. I'm going. Say, is exercise safe? Well, let's look at it. Is it applicable? Remember what I said? Okay. The reason for the safety thing is because of these studies. They showed that at very high fitness, the curve comes up. It's like a J-shaped curve, what we call it, or a hockey stick curve. That, in other words, these people seem to have a little bit higher risk than these people. And that phenomenon has been observed and reported in the literature since the Puffenberger papers in 1980s. Now, this study was the biggest study, 122,000, found no such thing. You see it? No such thing. And even our study with 750,000 plus, we found no such thing. And it's an interesting thing. Why is it? And there, again, another talk, maybe next year we will explain why. Okay? Now, then, if so, why did Pheidippides die? For all those who will go to a ACSM this year, please attend our conference, our colloquium, whatever they call it. The title is, Why Did Pheidippides Die? I proposed that, it was accepted, and we have 3 very, very good speakers. Aimin Lee from Harvard, Jonathan Myers from Palo Alto, my friend, and Barry Franklin from, he's retired now, but he's still active, and they are going to talk. We're going to introduce why did Pheidippides die, the positives and the negatives of exercise. Remember, exercise, all in this world, nothing is pure evil or pure good. It's a mixture of two. If you abuse exercise, it's going to bite you. If you go out to the sun for too long, it's going to burn you. It's going to damage your skin. So obviously we know this. And why did Pheidippides die? For all of you Greeks, I don't have to tell you what happened with Pheidippides. He ran from the marathon to here to tell the Athenians, Nenikikame. And he dropped dead, supposedly. Why did he then drop dead? This was an editorial the circulation asked us to write. And could it be that Pheidippides died from 1,000 paper cuts? What do I mean by this? Well, I don't know if you are aware of it. The Pheidippides does not just go from the marathon field to Athens to here, but he also ran to Sparta and back just weeks before the battle, and then probably was carrying message back and forth throughout the battlefield, the day of the battle, because they did not have cell phones those days. And so he did not just run 26 miles. He ran 326 miles plus, and he died. Is there a Pheidippides syndrome? And a Christian of small, relatively benign myocardial infarctions, that the accumulation of those two all lead to death. Now, we have evidence of that. Here's a study. About half of the patients dying suddenly had lesions. Autopsies revealed that. And this study shows that calcium deposits in athletes, in those who do vigorous exercise. So anyways, so an abuse of any system is not good. Okay? But overall, exercise is safe, and those who die are those who are not active. Okay? And let us not forget that the risk of not being active is much higher than the risk of being active. Okay? However, we came up with this. I said pan-metronidiston, and a friend of mine said metronidiston. Okay, both, either one, we understand, right? For Mark, that says moderation in all things, okay? I don't know if we have any English, not Greek speaking, but metronidiston is moderation of all things. And all the Westerners that I know, they confuse it. They think it's Latin. No, I said, no, it's Greek. We said it. So should we have then fitness as part of our evaluation? Physicians, should they evaluate? Should they ask you a question? We had talks regarding this, and we said, yes, of course we should. Are you kidding? You know, fitness is higher, carries, or lack of it, carries higher risk than any other disease, and you are not asking for it? I mean, wake up. Let's all wake up. Here is an example. Let's take this individual. Okay, if you follow the American Heart, the Framingham score, this individual has approximately 29% risk of cardiovascular disease in 10 years. That's standard. That's according to all kinds of data, okay? Now, how can it be when you have risk of 4 times higher for these individuals versus this individuals? How can then be mathematically, logically, how can you say that this individual has the same risk, has 28.9% risk than this individual? So the 28.7 or 29% risk is an average of all this. So the risk of this individual is underestimated and this individual's is overestimated. It cannot be anything else. If we believe in math, that is it. Can exercise be implemented in all populations? Remember, applicability is very important. Okay, now why is that so important? Because in the old days, the SCSM came up with a statement that says that we need to exercise at 60 to 75% of our VO2 max to get fit, to increase our VO2 max. The first SCSM statement. They did not say anything about fitness and health. They said that to increase VO2 max, this is the best way to exercise. Well, it was misunderstood, misinterpreted. And what do? We took to the streets and we did this. We did this. And people were dying in the United States because we thought this is what you have. Well, 60 to 70, 80 to 85% of VO2 max is a brutal speed. I cannot run 60 to 70. I cannot. Yes, Mark maybe, but not me. And guess what? I would dare to say 70% of the people, 75% of the people cannot do that. So that's not applicable. Not until Steve Blair comes. That's why Steve Blair is important. The studies. He said, no, you only have to walk to get benefits. You get 50% reduction if you just walk, if you just do this. And that changed the paradigm. And now you can apply exercise on everyone. Because walking, I don't have to teach you how to walk. You know this since you were 1 or 2. Okay? And guess what? You don't need anything than shoes. Just don't wear high heels. Okay? And so it's very applicable. And as you see here, you get 50% reduction. You just keep walking. Just walk, 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 walk. People say, how many days a week should I walk? I said 6. Well, they say 7. I said, well, God even God rested one day. So just rest one day. 6 is just plenty. Okay? All right. So since we have this relationship, this threshold, everything that I show you, and I'm not going to belabor the point, I just hope that, I have convinced you, you are already convinced, that exercise is medicine. However, we already knew that. Hippocrates said that. So we have reinvented the wheel. But what else we did? No. This is interesting. Our ancestors are just great. Mark, I'm sorry. But this is, you need to learn this. You need to take it and put it, here is Plato. Physical activity is not merely necessary for health and development of the body, but to balance and correct the correct intellectual pursuits as well. The mere athlete is brutal and Philistine. The mere intellectual, unstable and spiritless. How wonderfully he captures that. And then the right education must tune the strengths of the body and mind to perfect spiritual harmony. And this is another mistake another misconception of the Westerners. They think that the mind and body was introduced by the Romans. The connection between mind and body, I keep telling them, was introduced by my ancestors, not the Romans. Mind-body correction, the concept that has endured and will endure for many years, and we should not forget that. I thank you for your attention. I apologize